On the morning it happened, Ariana Colebrook believed she was walking into just another workday. She didn't know that within minutes her face would be burning, her wrists bleeding from steel cuffs, and her name stripped from her identity by a man with a badge and a loaded assumption. She didn't know she would hear herself called an animal, told she belonged in a cage, while strangers laughed and filmed instead of helping. All she knew in that moment, pressed against cold stone, was the familiar weight of humiliation that so many Black people carry in silence. The fear of speaking up, the terror of being misunderstood, the sick certainty that the truth might not matter. Her heart pounded, not just from pain, but from the realization that the system she had served her entire life was now closing in on her. What no one in that courthouse knew, what would change everything, was who Ariana really was. And if you stay, you will witness a moment so shocking it will force an entire courtroom to confront the lie it has been living in. On most mornings, Ariana Colebrook walked the last 2 blocks to the Madison Heights District Courthouse. She did it on purpose. The city woke up slowly there, delivery trucks coughing to life, coffee steam rising from paper cups. The courthouse steps still cool with night air. Ariana liked arriving before the noise. It reminded her that justice, when it worked, was supposed to be quiet, steady, and deliberate. That morning, she wore a simple gray coat and low heels. No robe, no escort, just a leather briefcase tucked under her arm, heavy with case files she'd reviewed past midnight. She looked like any other professional woman on her way to work. And that, she would soon learn, was the problem. Officer Daniel Hargrove spotted her from the bottom of the steps. He didn't know her name. He didn't ask. He didn't even wait for her to reach the metal detectors. "Hey, stop right there." Ariana slowed, confused but calm. "Good morning. I'm heading inside." Hargrove's eyes traveled over her, not seeing the briefcase, not seeing the purpose in her stride, only the color of her skin and the fact that she didn't belong in the picture he had already drawn in his head. "Courthouse isn't a shelter," he said. "Move along." Ariana felt the familiar tightening in her chest, that old unwelcome recognition. She had felt it as a law student, as a junior prosecutor, as a federal appointee who still got mistaken for support staff. "I work here," she replied evenly. "I have a..." "Don't get smart." His hand came up, blocking her path. "ID." She reached for her coat pocket. That's when it happened. The slap came fast and loud, the sound cracking across the stone steps. Her head snapped sideways. The world tilted. The briefcase flew from her hand, papers bursting into the air like startled birds. Before she could regain her footing, Hargrove's fingers closed around her throat. "Don't reach," he hissed. "I said don't reach." Ariana hit the wall hard. Cold stone, hot pain. His knee pressed into her thigh as he wrenched her arms behind her back. Metal cuffs bit into her wrists. "Animal like you doesn't get to walk into a federal building," he said, low and venomous. "You people think you can do whatever you want." Around them, officers gathered. Kyle Benton, Eric Mullins. Phones appeared. Someone laughed. Ariana tasted blood. Her cheek throbbed. But her eyes locked onto the bronze plaque above the courthouse doors. Madison Heights District Courthouse. Her courthouse. 20 feet away. Inside, her courtroom sat empty, waiting. She said nothing. Silence had always unsettled men like Hargrove, more than screaming ever could. He dragged her inside as if she weighed nothing. The narrative had already begun forming in his mind. Suspicious individual, aggressive, non-compliant. He had told this story before. The system knew the script. By the time Ariana was pushed into the courtroom, Judge Franklin Moore had taken the bench as temporary presiding judge. Prosecutor Linda Harrow sat poised at her table, pen ready. The gallery murmured with curiosity. A Black woman in handcuffs always drew interest. Hargrove straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth, rehearsed. "This morning I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security." Ariana listened. Every word landed with clinical clarity. "She refused to provide identification," Hargrove continued. "Became verbally aggressive, claimed she was someone important." Judge Moore nodded, already convinced. "She was dressed inappropriately for court business," Hargrove added, eyes flicking toward Ariana. carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. Stolen. That word lingered. From the corner of the room, Bailiff Robert Kane frowned. Something about this didn't sit right, but he couldn't place why. "Did she resist arrest?" Judge Moore asked. "Yes, sir," Hargrove said without hesitation. "I used minimal force to protect public safety." Minimal. Ariana glanced down at her cuffed hands. She could still feel his fingers on her throat. Prosecutor Harrow stood. "Officer Hargrove, in your years of service, have you seen this behavior before?" "Unfortunately, yes," he replied. "There's a pattern. Certain people believe rules don't apply to them. They play the discrimination card when confronted." A few heads nodded. Familiar, comfortable lies. When it was Ariana's turn, Judge Moore looked at her with thin patience. "You may speak, ma'am. Briefly." She stood slowly. The room shifted. There was something about the way she moved, measured, grounded, that didn't match the chaos painted by Hargrove's words. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, not pleading. "I'd like to clarify several factual inaccuracies." Judge Moore blinked. Ariana continued. "I was not trespassing. I was on a public sidewalk at approximately 8:47 a.m., approaching my place of work." Her place of work. She watched confusion ripple through the room. "I was carrying legitimate legal documents related to pending cases," she added, "and I attempted to present identification before being assaulted." A stir moved through the gallery. Prosecutor Harrow stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the defendant is making legal claims without counsel." Ariana turned to her, eyes steady. "Pro se defendants retain the right to present evidence in their own defense." Silence. Judge Moore leaned forward. "Ms. Colebrook, you seem unusually familiar with courtroom procedure." Ariana paused just long enough to let the moment breathe. "I have some experience," she said. In the back row, a young law clerk, Emily Parker, felt a jolt of recognition. The voice, the cadence. She'd heard it before, many times. Ariana lifted her cuffed hands slightly. "Your Honor, I formally request preservation of all surveillance footage from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m., including courthouse cameras and body camera backups." Hargrove's jaw tightened. Judge Moore hesitated. "On what basis?" "On the basis that such evidence will conclusively demonstrate the truth," Ariana replied, "or the lack of it." The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. Judge Moore cleared his throat. "We'll recess for 15 minutes. The gavel fell. As the room buzzed, Bailiff Kane approached Ariana slowly, eyes wide now with recognition. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice shaking, "are you—" Ariana met his gaze. No anger, just gravity. "Please bring my robes," she said quietly, "and my gavel." Kane swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." In the holding room, Ariana closed her eyes for a moment. The bruise on her cheek pulsed. For years, she had investigated patterns of misconduct, written opinions about abuse of power, spoken about bias from the safety of the bench. This time, the system had put its hands on her throat, and it had no idea what it had just done. Before we continue, this story asks uncomfortable questions about power, race, and what happens when silence finally breaks. Do you think the system protects authority more than truth? Yes or no? Tell us your answer. The 15-minute recess felt like a hell breath stretched too long. Outside the courtroom, whispers rippled through the marble corridors. Phones buzzed. Clerks leaned into doorways. Word traveled fast in places built on routine. And something about this case had cracked the rhythm. A black woman in cuffs who spoke like a judge. A bailiff who'd gone pale. An officer who suddenly couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Officer Daniel Hargrove sat at the prosecution table, jaw tight, one leg bouncing. He told himself this was fine. Recesses happened. People talk big all the time. He had cameras, he had backup. He had done this for years and walked away clean every time. Still, sweat gathered at the base of his neck. Across the hall, Ariana Colebrook stood alone in a small holding room. The mirror above the sink reflected a woman with a purple bruise blooming across her cheek, her hair slightly out of place, her wrist marked red where the cuffs had been. She studied herself without flinching. For decades, she had written opinions about abuse of authority using calm, neutral language. For decades, she had weighed evidence from a distance. Now her own body carried the evidence, and it was heavier than any file she had ever held. Her phone buzzed. A message from Chief Judge Eleanor Whitman. "Are you safe?" Ariana typed back with one hand. "Not yet, but I will be." Moments later, Bailiff Robert Kane returned, breathless, carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box. He shut the door behind him like he was sealing a vault. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't recognize you in civilian clothes. When they brought you in like that..." Ariana held up a hand. "This isn't about recognition," she said gently. "It's about what happens when no one bothers to look." Kane nodded, ashamed. She unzipped the garment bag. The black judicial robe slid into view, heavy, familiar. As she slipped it over her shoulders, the room seemed to steady around her. Not because the robe gave her power, but because it reminded her who she had always been, even when the system pretended otherwise. She opened the wooden box. Inside lay her gavel, engraved years ago with a simple phrase, "Justice is blind, but accountable." "Announce me properly," Ariana said. Kane swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Back in the courtroom, Officer Hargrove laughed too loudly at something Prosecutor Linda Harrow said. The sound bounced awkwardly off the walls. Judge Franklin Moore shuffled papers, uneasy, sensing the air had changed. "All rise," Kane's voice rang out. Everyone stood. "Court is now back in session," Kane continued, his voice firmer now. "The Honorable Judge Ariana Colebrook presiding." The words hit the room like a dropped plate. Officer Hargrove froze. Judge Moore half stood, then stopped, color draining from his face. Prosecutor Harrow's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. Ariana stepped through the side door in full judicial robes, the gold trim catching the overhead lights. She walked with the ease of someone who had taken this path thousands of times. Not rushed, not angry. Certain. She took her seat behind the bench. Her bench. "Please be seated," she said calmly. No one moved. "Now," Ariana continued, voice steady but caring. "Officer Hargrove, you may remain standing." Hargrove's knees locked. His mouth opened, then closed again. A sound like static filled his ears. Judge Moore cleared his throat. "Your Honor, thank you for covering my docket during my unexpected delay," Ariana said, turning to him. "You're free to return to yours." Moore didn't argue. He gathered his robe and fled the courtroom, eyes down, like a man who had just realized he'd been sitting in the wrong seat all along. Ariana's gaze returned to Hargrove. "Officer," she said quietly, "you testified under oath today." "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered. "You stated that the woman you assaulted was trespassing, aggressive, and carrying stolen documents." The word assaulted echoed. "Yes," he said again, weaker. Ariana tapped a tablet on the bench. "Let's examine that." The screen lit up. Courthouse security footage filled the monitors. Clear, unbroken, merciless. Ariana approaching the steps, Hargrove blocking her path, his hands striking her face, his fingers closing around her throat. A collective gasp moved through the gallery. "Pause," Ariana said. The image froze on Hargrove's face, twisted with rage. "Officer," Ariana asked, "do you see any threat here?" Silence. She swiped to another clip. Body cam footage, his voice unmistakable. "Another one who doesn't know her place," it snarled through the speakers. "These people need to be taught." Prosecutor Harrow's chair scraped back. She began stuffing papers into her briefcase. Panic etched across her face. Ariana didn't look at her. "Officer Hargrove," Ariana continued, "earlier today you told this court that accusations of racism are often used to distract from criminal behavior." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me," she said, "what distraction explains your words?" Hargrove's legs trembled. He said nothing. Ariana turned to the gallery. "Over the past 6 months, I have been working with the FBI Civil Rights Task Force, Midwest Division, investigating patterns of racial bias within the East Madison Heights precinct." Murmurs erupted. "This morning," she added, "you provided us with evidence far more complete than anything we could have hoped to collect." She lifted her gavel, not to strike, but to hold it up. "You didn't know who I was," she said, "because you didn't care to know. You saw a black woman and decided she was powerless. Her voice didn't rise. That made it worse. Officer Hargrove, Ariana said, you assaulted a sitting federal judge. You lied under oath, and you did so while relying on a system you believed would protect you. She set the gavel down. It will not. Hargrove collapsed into the chair behind him as if his bones had dissolved. His career, his certainty, his carefully practiced authority, all of it evaporated under the weight of truth. Ariana turned to the courtroom one last time. This court will recess, she said, while formal charges are prepared. The gavel fell, not loud, final. As officers moved in to escort Hargrove away, this time without force, without cruelty, Ariana sat back, the bruise on her cheek visible, undeniable. A reminder, not of weakness, of survival, and of what happens when the system finally looks itself in the mirror. When the courtroom doors closed behind Officer Daniel Hargrove, the silence that followed felt different from before. It wasn't shock anymore. It was reckoning. Ariana Colebrook remained seated for a long moment after the gavel fell. The bruise on her cheek still throbbed, a dull reminder that justice, even when it arrives, often comes late and leaves marks. She let her hands rest on the bench, steady, open, before lifting her eyes to the people who had filled the room. Clerks, lawyers, citizens, faces that had learned in a single morning how fragile truth could be when power decided to lie. Before we proceed, Ariana said quietly, there is something this court needs to acknowledge. She stood, stepping down from the bench, not as a gesture of humility, but of proximity. She wanted to be seen at eye level. What happened to me today did not happen because I am a judge, she said. It happened because for a few minutes, I was seen as someone without a title, without protection, without power. She paused, letting the meaning settle. That is what many people live with every day. Chief Judge Eleanor Whitman sat in the front row, her expression grave. She nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a truth she had known but never fully felt. Formal charges were filed swiftly: assault on a judicial officer, perjury, civil rights violations under color of law. As Hargrove was led away, stripped of his badge, his shoulders sagged under a weight he had never expected to carry. Not accountability, he had avoided that for years, but exposure, the kind that couldn't be negotiated away. Within hours, the FBI Civil Rights Task Force sealed evidence rooms and issued subpoenas. Over the next weeks, the investigation widened. Body cam footage surfaced. Audio recordings, complaints long labeled unsubstantiated, were reopened and re-examined. Names that had once been whispers in hallways became lines in official reports. Kyle Benton resigned before charges could be filed. Eric Mullins was placed on administrative leave, then indicted for conspiracy and obstruction. Supervisors who had signed off on dismissals found their signatures suddenly mattered. And for the first time in a long time, people noticed. News cameras gathered on the courthouse steps. Ariana did not speak to them that day. She went home instead, washed the blood from her lip, and sat in silence with the weight of what had happened. Strength, she knew, wasn't about how loudly you stood up. Sometimes it was about how long you endured without losing yourself. 6 months later, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Dozens of cases tied to Hargrove's arrest were dismissed or retried. Men and women walked free from cells they should never have seen. Families reunited in quiet parking lots, hugging under gray skies, crying without cameras. The Madison Heights Police Department entered federal oversight. Training protocols changed. Body camera systems were upgraded with independent backups that could no longer malfunction. Community review boards were established, staffed not with symbols, but with voices that carried lived experience. And Ariana Colebrook returned to the bench, not as a symbol, as a steward. On her first day back, she wore the same gray coat she'd worn that morning. The bruise had faded, but the memory hadn't. As she climbed the steps, people noticed how she paused, just for a second, before entering. Not from fear, from resolve. Inside the courtroom, a young woman sat nervously at the defendant's table. Black, early 20s, accused of resisting arrest. Her hands shook as she clutched a folded piece of paper. Ariana took her seat. "Good morning," she said gently. "You're safe here." The woman looked up, startled, and nodded through tears. That was the quiet victory no headline could capture. Months later, the courthouse was renamed the Ariana Colebrook Justice Center. Ariana protested the decision at first. Name, she argued, did not fix systems, but the community insisted. They wanted a reminder carved into stone, not of one woman's power, but of one moment when truth refused to be small. At the dedication ceremony, Ariana finally spoke. "Justice isn't about revenge," she said to the crowd gathered outside. "It's about repair. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to survive what you did." She looked out over faces of every color, every age. "And it's about remembering that dignity is not something you earn by behaving perfectly. It's something you're born with." As the applause faded, Ariana stepped back. The work would continue. It always did. But that day something had shifted. Not because one officer fell, but because a system was forced to listen. That night, Ariana walked the last 2 blocks home again. The city hummed around her, ordinary, alive. She passed people who didn't know her name, didn't know her story. And that, she realized, was the point. Justice didn't need applause. It needed witnesses, and it needed courage, quiet, steady, unyielding, to stand where it mattered most. Before we close this story, we want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Did it move you, yes or no? Do you think stories like this can change how people see racial discrimination, yes or no? If you believe justice should be equal for everyone, would you say this ending felt right, yes or no? If you like this story, comment the number 111 below. Tell us which country you're watching from, and if this story meant something to you, please share it. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them most.